Welcome to Satori Sounds, the podcast that invites you to unwind, relax, and explore the deeper currents of life. In today's episode, we discuss a variety of topics, including unhelpful and helpful automatic states of being, emotions that pop up, and also maybe linger. In addition, we also cover themes of existentialism, asking yourself those big questions like, who am I? Where do I want to be? What am I doing? Thanks for joining us today.
I feel like there's not fighting it constantly, but there's definitely like different thought patterns in a way you can't control it, and it just pops into your head, and you have to be like, hold on a second, because some of the thoughts that you have, you're like, but if that kind of reasoning with it, and I definitely find when I'm more stressed, I'm like, there's a looser net, shall we say? Things just start to slip out a little more.
Well, it's that cognitive side that Daniel Kahneman always talks about. Your system 2 is not monitoring if you're tired or if you're strained. And that's those instant thoughts are going to slip through, and you're going to say things like, you're an idiot, to someone that you're having an argument with. And it's just, you see it all the time in people when they're exhausted, when they're drunk, when they're maybe hungry. System 2 is like, I'm turning off now. Low power mode.
Yeah, it just can't be. But it is that filtering. Filtering, that's what I'd probably name it. That filtering of those thoughts is definitely taxing. I definitely notice, the more, especially like January's been nuts with work and output, and I've definitely noticed it more that my conscious ability to filter some of those thoughts is definitely strained, I think is probably the polite way to put it.
Yeah, there's a really interesting way of framing it in like functional analysis, and it's this idea of demand versus capacity. So everything we do, from having conversations to cooking dinner to walking to, you name it, whatever it is, maintaining eye contact, puts a level of demand on us as human beings. And each task has a different, if you like, costs our resources. And our capacity is our ability to respond to those demands. And there's going to be loads of things that basically limit your capacity to respond to demands. And it's where the age-old phrase comes from. How many spoons have you got in your drawer? It's talking about your cognitive resources. So your ability to sit on that thought of, this person's a real dork, or whatever it is. And it's that balance, basically.
Yeah, that capacity is definitely true, though. I've definitely find that emotion side. Maybe people don't marry that up always, in terms of realizing that, when you're under stress, duress, bad night's sleep, or for whatever those other reasons, that having that capacity to be able to do that, I think that's a really good way of framing it. It's interesting the time of day as well. I definitely find that, especially when I know I need to make some big decisions, I've learned to do that earlier in the day, because by the end of the day, often I just don't have that functional capacity to be able to make some of those more informed, strategic decisions.
I'm the opposite. In the morning, don't talk to me.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. Don't even bother. Wasting your time.
Leave me alone.
Leave me alone. I'm not on yet. Just wait for me to power up properly. Go sit in a corner and play Tiddlywinks or something. Just leave me alone for a moment. Let me get to grips with this day.
Dude, I know I'm an old man, but come on, Tiddlywinks.
Oh, it appeals to the masses.
That's true. The masses, let's bring back Tiddlywinks. That's the objective for this year.
That's my objective for life. That's my mission.
Chess is overrated. Bring back Tiddlywinks.
Exactly. I'm sick of all these Russian defense moves in chess. Let's get straight to the Tiddlywinks. Level playing field.
Yeah, it's true. That is true. I'll go back to your point though. You just said about like you've been late in the day, and then me saying morning. That it's definitely paying attention to your energy in that way is really interesting. I've definitely found it the more I've worked with teams and other people, not just my energy but other people's. Realizing when you're either on or things are going on. Being aware of that in other people, of kind of their own energy levels, because as you say, some people are not a morning person. Some people just need to be left alone, whereas I kind of wake up, it's on, and then by like 5-6 o'clock I'm like, brain's completely taxed. I even plan dinner the day before now so that I don't have to think about it. Like I've got the menu set out for the week. It's like I don't have to think that way. I just get to the evening and kind of, for me, autopilot just gets turned on.
Sometimes you just got to go into cruise control.
Cruise control's good. Just falling back into the systems in a way that your body's just, kind of running. You're not as, it's always there, but you're less aware in that sense.
Well, what tends to happen in many ways is that you've always got these two, I suppose, systems, as you put it, functioning in the background. Whether you want to frame it in a neuroscience perspective, you've got your two aspects of your nervous system. And if you want to look at it in that cognitive domain, which is what Daniel Kahneman does, your system 1 and system 2. Whether you're framing it in kind of those ideas, what effectively you're beginning to look at realistically is, when does it become too much for your system 2? That problem solving, that conscious thought, when is that over exasperated? When is that tired? And what are your warning signs? Because there will be early warning signs, because it's almost like a check engine light in the car. That lets you know that there's something going on with the car. So you have to think, well, what's my check engine light saying right now? Is it that I'm hungry? Is it that I'm tired? Is it that I've had some really bad news?
Yeah, 100%. That I like that check engine light analogy, actually, of just checking in with yourself and realizing, because it's very easy in that moment. That emotion could come up, just act in that sense. But actually, as you say, that check engine light of, hold on a second, what's going on here? From all those different reasons.
And I mean, there are some emotions that you won't be able to control. Sometimes your body kicks in. So a common example that I think most people have experienced is, imagine you're crossing the road and suddenly, as you step out, you notice a car. You get a slight pang of anxiety and your body will throw you back. You're not doing that consciously. Your body's doing that. And you had no control over their action. Your body just goes, bang, problem solves instantly. That's your system 1 kicking in, pulling you out of danger. That anxiety has motivated you to stay out of danger, to stay alive. So there are situations where, well, one, you don't really want to be in control of that, but also that you're not going to be able to, because you've been programmed and you've biologically developed this way of surviving.
Yeah, that's a really good point, though, around is that bit of, you don't actually want yourself to be in control. You want to be able to fall back on it. There's a phrase from the military which just kind of goes along the lines of that under stress you fall back to the level of your systems. And you look at that with high performance teams and other things as well. There's some really interesting books, and I forget the film actually now. I'm going to have to look the film up after this, but it's I'm pretty sure is it baseball? I'm pretty sure it's a baseball team. It's a failing baseball team, and they strip it right back to just teaching people these foundational habits and building it up. And over time, that kind of compounding effect of all those habits brings them to the point where they actually start winning games. And you fast forward to the end of the season and they're near the back end of the top end of the leaderboard and winning. But beforehand, because they were just, reacting in the moment and they didn't have those controls in place as such, it was, they couldn't make a certain play because someone was irritated or that other thing. But actually, as you said, bring it back to that kind of automatic in a way. They don't even have to think at that point. Their habits just override and it just happens. So it can happen in that fight or flight moment. But I think also you can use some of them longer term once they're instilled to help you perform under pressure.
I think that one of the really most interesting ones I've seen within the last 3 years is probably an MMA fighter called Leon Edwards. Now, Leon Edwards, this was when he got the championship belt in his division. And he's a British fighter, he's really talented, probably one of the most talented fighters to come out of Britain. And he fought the champion called Kamaru Usman. Now, Usman put Leon under non-stop pressure for all 5 rounds until the very last seconds. What Leon did in that moment was default to a move that he has practiced time and time again. And it was a head kick feint. And so he went to throw something and then comes up, bang, fluent, smooth. Leon, that is, had been battered for 5 rounds. And he fell back to something that he knew how to do automatically as a Hail Mary, here we go, and his body carried out the motion. He didn't sit there and weigh it up in his head, and I think that's a prime example of what can happen with your body in terms of that automatic processing. And as a result, it won him the belt in what can only be described as a victory that no one saw coming.
That's really poignant, isn't it? Under that duress, the body just took over and the individual happened. It's funny though, in a way, because I think a lot of people miss that about habits in terms of, something like that's ingrained and trained so much that it becomes an automatic reflex. It's a bit like us watching Usain Bolt run those 9 seconds. We all kind of forget how many years of training, he'd gone through to do that. Or, for instance, Michael Phelps with some of the gold medals that he'd won, the amount of training that he'd done and visualized it as well, that visualization.
It comes back to what we were talking about in episode 1. You don't just become successful. You have to spend the time. You basically have to invest. That's the way it is. You have to pick your craft. Whatever you want to focus on, pick it and practice it. Train it as regularly as you can. You don't just fall into success. It's not just an accident necessarily.
No, but it's amazing how it appears to many people as this overnight thing, isn't it? A lot of people will just suddenly see that outcome. Like some people may have watched that fight that you were talking about for the first time, and they just go, "Wow, what an amazing fighter!" But they have no idea, as you say, about like the backstory maybe of that individual, or kind of, as you say, that was a move that he just practiced time and time again from there. And those repetitions, I think repetition is definitely an underrated kind of.
That's the practice part. And that's the point I was making, that you've just got to practice whatever it is you're doing. And we touched on that, I think even in episode 4 as well, when we talk about Nico Mancini ethics. That actually whatever you're going to do it well. And you do it well by practicing and being diligent with the thing that you've got to do.
Yeah, you've got to decide what it is you want to do, and then, as you say, stick to it. Because there's, motivation will only take you so far. Motivation might get you started, right? But that kind of commitment and then that consistency of just turning up every day will be the bit that really makes a difference. I think I can apply that to so many aspects of life where you don't want to do things. We've talked about it before in the last episode of putting on the shoes to go out for a run. You don't want to do it. I remember watching a video of David Goggins, and actually, everyone sees him as this individual who's just been out there and crushing it, and he's always motivated, he wants to do it. And he says, sometimes I just sit on the side of the bed for half an hour and I just say, I don't want to do it, man. Even he goes through that, right? Even he goes through that at that level. As much as it is habitual to him at this point, he still goes through that element where he's fighting some of it, but he still gets up and goes. And, motivation alone, just won't get you there.
Well, I suppose it's when motivation becomes discipline. And I think that's the key word, that you have to take a very disciplined approach sometimes. And that can be hard to do because it's doing it when you don't want to do it. And I remember I used to train with a guy and he said, you need to do it when you don't want to do it because that's when it counts.
100%. Because you're not going to feel motivated every day. You have to do it when you don't want to do it. And that is definitely, that's a really good phrase, because I think, it's all too easy nowadays. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. Or I won't, right? And there's different theories of how long things take to build, and habit-wise, and how long it takes. But it's so evident that repetition of time and time again, whether you're turning up for enjoyment or just doing it. Mike Tyson's famously been said that he didn't like a moment of his training. He just didn't enjoy it, and actually still just turn up. And if you want to be great, that repetition of just getting going and executing, it kind of ties back as well to what we were talking about at the start of this conversation, though, of being aware of those feelings and those decisions, because that emotion can just pop up, but actually you go, I don't want to do it, but at the same time you need to be able to have that capacity to say, hold on a second, I'm going to do it anyway.
And I suppose just to think a bit more about emotions as well. We often talk about emotions popping up, but actually, let's talk about the inverse. You might have that emotion for a longer time. Actually, you might not be listening to yourself. Is the thing that you're doing actually generating that sense of well-being? Because we're saying, oh yeah, do this thing and stick to it. But you actually have to ask yourself, generally, the thing that I'm doing, A, does it contribute to a sense of well-being? And B, do I enjoy doing it? Those are the two conditions that you have to think about. And if you're saying no to both, my advice would be like, don't bother.
Why do it? Yeah.
Well,
friction's there for a reason, isn't it, right? It's either showing you where you're going or it's pointing out, I really don't want to be going that way. So that is a good point. As much as you've maybe committed and you're going to execute, that alone won't get you there. You've got to as we talked about, do things in line with your values, as you say. That's definitely a key piece of the puzzle. Is just doing it for the sake of it kind of isn't enough. It's very easy to say, oh, you got to be disciplined, but you do, and you can make things easier by making them enjoyable, making them simple. But if they don't align to those deeper values, then there is that definitely bigger question of why is it that you're doing that?
Yeah. It's an important question that you have to begin to ask yourself. And when we think about that broader, your values and stuff like that, sometimes, and we mentioned it again in episode 1, sunken cost fallacy, you might go, well, this is the only way to meet my values, and you keep driving all this investment in that one specific area. But there are lots of ways to live your values potentially, and it's about exploring those and being open-minded to the possibilities. So don't get blinkered into one way of being. I always think when I'm over-investing in something.
Definitely. Well, it's very easy to do that, I think, or from my experience anyway, because you can almost look at it as I've climbed this mountain, and you suddenly get to the top right, and it's been a hard slog there, and then you suddenly realise it's not the mountain that you wanted to be on. The pain of going back down and then restarting. You're going to get pain and suffering either way. From my experience, the quicker you realise that you're not on that right path and go through that suffering to start again, will definitely bring you back in line with those values. Because I think we can all say it, sometimes you've stayed in a place too long because the discomfort of changing things in your mind is a bigger pain than actually just admitting that that wasn't the right thing for you at that time and that you should have just stopped. Go.
No, from my perspective, sometimes there's anything to add to a statement like that. I suppose it'd be like, imagine you entered the wrong house when you on your way home. You don't stay there. You go, oh God, this is the wrong house. I better go home to the right one. And you leave and you go home.
This is what they're cooking for dinner, to be fair.
Well, yeah. I don't know. You can't eat at everyone's house. I ignore him. You can't eat at everyone's house. Some people don't do clean cooking. Let's put it like that. So watch that.
No, you're right. You are definitely right in that sense. But if there's nothing else in some ways, as you say, just to add to some of those things. It's interesting though. I think from my personal experience, looking at that point of staying in a place too long, I can think of a good handful of examples over time where I've done that. And actually, what I've realised is by the time I've left, how much negative effect that was having on me, from just stress in day-to-day life or, other connections with people, just how I was acting day to day. And it's only after that you get yourself out of that situation do you suddenly realise how detrimental it was being. I think sometimes, as you say, the blinkers, you sometimes aren't aware of that situation and the effect it's having on you.
So we're talking very abstractly, I think, in many ways. So to give it a living, breathing sense, can you give one of your examples?
Yeah, definitely. My last role, I was in a very fortunate position, a very privileged position to be put in a kind of project that only really comes along once in your lifetime. And everyone sold it to me as, this will change you. And don't get me wrong, it changed me for the better. But I got to the point where I was in a very strong position leading the team day to day. I was responsible for, 5 or 6 people in that team. And I took it personally. I took it more than a job. I took on that personal responsibility of looking after other people and delivering. And very quickly burnt myself out. And that was in the first kind of year of working on it. I managed to come back, put some more control measures in place and was like, right, let's go again, let's learn. And I got to the point where the project got opened and I still was like, oh, well, now, even though it's open, there's these other things. And I couldn't let go in a way. I had to stay fully committed to everything because I felt I'd taken on this level of personal responsibility that I didn't need to at all. It wasn't my job. It wasn't my responsibility. I wasn't the overall director for leading the job. I was the day-to-day lead of the project, but I'd put so much personal investment in this. It was the only project I worked on. I carried it on my back. It was like my flag. And so I couldn't accept any viewership or any thoughts or any opinions that it wasn't the right thing to be doing for me. And actually, I was getting more irate with people. I was getting more burnt out more and more in that way. I was getting argumentative with people. And I'd gone from this place of a lot more stepping back, strategic thinking, to being really buried in the minutiae of the detail of leading that project. And ultimately, I got to the point where I went, I just can't do this anymore. And I actually left the organization completely. I just left the role because I was like, I can't do this anymore. And it's only after the fact that I suddenly realised that I had put way too much on my own shoulders that I didn't need to. And actually, if I just stepped back and realised that I wasn't ultimately responsible for all of this, and that actually there's a lot of other people who are willing to help, probably could have got through it a lot easier. And likely, probably could have seen the project out for a longer time.
So it's kind of that over expenditure of the self. You gave too much of yourself to one specific thing and it completely drained you, completely overwhelmed you. And I think a lot of people definitely can identify with that because, we've all had passion projects that have gone from being a passion project to being a complete overly personalized obsession to some degree. And we've got nothing else to give anywhere else. And it basically takes over the rest of our lives and stops us engaging with the rest of our values.
100%. It can be completely consuming. Have you found some ways to prevent yourself from slipping in that? Are there any key things that stick out in your mind?
From my perspective, I tend to think about that in context of maybe social relationships as well as work. So it could be like unhelpful friendships and things like that. And so there are a lot of perspectives around relational effectiveness that I would consider, as well as thinking about simple things like pros and cons lists. But given you've highlighted living and breathing example, how did you get out of that specific example? What did you do?
Where did it start? I think I buried myself to the point that I was so confused that I knew something had to change, if that makes sense. Because on one hand, I was completely burnt out and I was, drained and ruined. But on the other hand, I felt like I had to carry this project on my back because it almost became my persona. It's like I was working on that. I was delivering that project.
Yeah.
And that friction between the two just got to the point where I was like, I can't sustain this anymore. So I definitely realised and started listening to myself more. And I think that's kind of in a way where a lot of this journey started for me, because it was like, well, hold on a second. Is this actually serving with what I want? And the interesting question that popped up at that point was, I no longer knew what I wanted.
Yeah.
And actually, so that to me, if I think of the visual point is, I was living in a hotel room 2 nights a week, working on site 3 days a week and just crunching it out. And I remember sitting there in this hotel room one night, like an existential crisis. I was just like, what the hell are you doing with your life? Like I'd lived on this, I'd surfed this wave for so long. And you imagine you're surfing this wave, right? And this wave is careering towards the rocks. The rocks were irrelevant to me because I was enjoying the wave that much. I could have easily just ridden into it. So to get into the straight answer of what you asked, I think I realised there was a huge amount of friction there and that something didn't stack up. And then I got very worried after having 5 years of certainty. I'd made this 5-year plan, I'd executed it. I suddenly was like, I don't even know what I want. And to me, that was the wake-up call where I was like, it's time to get out.
Hearing your story there really does remind me of an author called Yalom. And so I think I've spoken about Yalom before, I can't remember. But to me, he's basically like clinical Jesus. Therapy Jesus is what I'd call Yalom.
Clinical Jesus, I love that.
Yeah, he's the messiah of therapy. If you get a therapist and they read Yalom, you're in. You're in for a good time.
Is that what if I go to therapy, that's the first question I ask?
Yeah, first question you ask. Have you ever read Yalom? And if they say no, just leave.
Just leave.
Just get out of there. If they don't even know who that is, you're wasting your time, ladies and gentlemen. But he talks about these pillars of existentialism, and he provides a therapeutic approach called an existential approach. But the pillars that he mentions are freedom and responsibility, authenticity, these kind of notions of who am I? So identity, and then also this sense of meaning. And it almost sounds like in that moment you start to ask yourself these questions. What am I doing with my life? Who am I? How do I want to live? What do I want to achieve? Who are the people that I want to be with and around? The relationship part. Do I want to spend the rest of my life doing this? And obviously not to be too glib, but one of the pillars of existential psychotherapies and those philosophical models is around death as well. It's like, if I was to die tomorrow, would I feel fulfilled? Is that what I wanted to do? And in acceptance and commitment therapy, there is this exercise, which I think is a brilliant exercise. And effectively, what it asks you to do is imagine you're 80. We've skipped 50 years of your life. Who would be at your birthday party, your 80th birthday party? Who would be there? What things would you want to tell people about your life? What achievements would you want marked down? What memories would you want to have? Where would you want to be? And so it's a very clever exercise of asking these existential questions in what feels like not a very existentially threatening way. Because obviously when you go in with that freedom, who are you, what are your relationships, people go, oh, yo, sugar, like that's so intense, get away. So if you can frame it in that vehicle of, well, you're 80 now, you're 95 or you're 100, what do you want? What would you cast your eye back over? What would be important to you?
I really like that. It also takes it, as you say, it takes that pressure off it immediately, because in a way 80 sounds like years away, so it doesn't have the same weighting. But yeah, looking back from that perspective, I think is a really useful. I've not heard it in that way, which is I really like that. But it's definitely something I've used where I've shaped like the 5-year plans of people, or I've looked at larger strategy where you kind of go, where do you see yourself in 5 years? That's that can help people short term with their strategy and mapping out how they progress. But as you say, that almost later parts of life, and I think really to me what I'm hearing from that is that it's, have you lived life on your terms and have you fulfilled what you wanted to? That's what I'd take from that.
And you can ask that question to yourself throughout your life, because it will change. My goals at nearly 30 are going to be different to when I was 18. And they will be different when I'm 40, and they'll be different when I'm 50. And so repeatedly asking those questions, checking in with yourself existentially, is an important activity to do.
Very much so. You might realise you've climbed up that wrong mountain, but it might not be as big a mountain as someone who hadn't checked in with themselves. You might be able to come back down or change, and actually, you might do all of that and realise you're on the right path. Even when I achieved that 5-year goal, right, everyone at work was like, you've crushed it, what's next? And it was a bit like, for the first time in those 5 years, I was suddenly like, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. So things can change. And I'd even say in the last year, things have changed. I left that job, went into a different one, thinking that's definitely what I want. And then you kind of look at, is it what I want, actually? There's no harm in that. I don't think people should beat themselves up if they suddenly realise that they've made a decision and they haven't, because, there's a very famous phrase of, you're one decision away from a completely different life.
What I've started doing recently, to think about your question to me, what would you do? What do you do? What advice have you got? I was recently having a conversation with a friend, his very close friend. Now, sadly, his father has passed, and that was a real blow to him and his family, and all my blessings and love to them, because ultimately it's a very, very hard thing to sit with. But he told me a story about his father, and I think this really captures the antithesis of what we're talking about when we think about these existential themes and this being 80 and looking back over your life. And my friend's father was a surgeon, one of the leading surgeons in the UK, and he went back to his home country and he started giving medical advice to people who couldn't afford medical advice. And his dad, so my friend's grandfather, was arguing with his dad, saying things like, you're giving away your trade for free, what are you doing? Don't do this, how will you make money? And my friend's father turned around and said, my trade? No, this is my mission. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I suppose whatever you approach in your life, begin to approach it with the same passion. And if you haven't got that same passion at any point, ask yourself, why do I not have that passion? What's going on for me doing this particular activity? So I think about that a lot.
Yeah, It's so true. So true.